of yesteryear, great Rabbonim, great culture in of itself. We're going to speak about the country, the Kurdistan, and the Jewish community, the history of the Jewish community over there, respectively. We know they're from the geographic, let's say Kurdistani Jews are obviously from the region of Kurdistan, covering parts of northwestern Iran. This also northern Iraq, northeast Syria, southeastern Turkey. Now, Kurdistani Jews, let's just say, lived as closed ethnic communities until they were expelled from Kurdistan as part of the wider expulsion of Jews from Arab and Muslim states, especially in the 1940s, 1950s, respectively. The native language of Kurdistani Jews was Judeo-Aramaic rather than Kurdish. Now, it's interesting. Kurdistani Jews natively adhere to Judaism and obviously originate from the Middle East. And obviously Mizrahi Hebrew will be used for the liturgy. Now, many of the Kurdistani Jews, especially the ones who hail from Iraq, went through, let's say, some sort of blending with regards to Sephardic Judaism during the 18th century, the 1700s, respectively. And now, it's interesting. I think in Israel currently there's about 300,000 Jewish people of Kurdistani origin, which is very, very interesting to point out. Now, let's talk a bit about the present and the past. Now, in present day, the overwhelming majority of Kurdistani Jews, obviously, they would live in Israel, with the community's presence coming as a direct result of either the Jewish, let's say, exodus from Muslim states or making aliyah by those remaining in the following decades, obviously. So the group historically preferred to be called Kurdistani Jews, or the Jews of Kurdistan, rather than Kurdish Jews. Why was that? While they were integrated among the Kurds, they did not identify as ethnic Kurds, but as an ethnic Mizrahi Jews, let's just say. They were not tribal like the Kurds and had to rely on the protection of Kurdish tribes. Although they gradually, let's say, adopted aspects of Kurdish culture, including language, their native language had been Neo-Aramaic, a dialect continuum, let's just say, in of itself. And they lived in peace in general with their Kurdish neighbours. They firmly maintained a separate identity and usually segregated themselves from the Kurds, respectively. The vast majority of Kurdistan Jews immigrated to Israel in the 20th century. In Israel, they were seen by Mizrahi Jews who developed their own identity in Kurdistan was cultural rather than ethnic, let's just say, in itself. Let's explore a bit of the history with regards to Jews itself. Now, the Middle Ages time period, there was a famous chronicler, historian called Benjamin of Tudela, a person we've spoken about on various occasions before, and Pethathia of Regensburg. There were about 100 Jewish settlements, let's say, and substantial Jewish population in Kurdistan going back to the 12th century. Benjamin of Tudela also gives the account of David al-Roy. He was, let's say, seemed as a messianic leader over here, this is what Wikipedia is saying, from central Kurdistan, who rebelled against the Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtadi. He claimed he was that in of itself, and had plans to lead the Jews back to Jerusalem. These travellers also report of well-established and wealthy Jewish communities in Mosul, which was a commercial and spiritual centre in close proximity to Kurdistan. Many Jews, fearful of approaching crusaders, had fled from Syria and Palestine to Babylonia and Kurdistan. The Jews of Mosul enjoyed some degree of autonomy in managing their own community. So I don't know much with regards to the history of David al-Roy, respectively, but and all these figures, I believe, that claim they were a messiah, obviously false messiahs, all throughout Jewish history. So that's what's chronicled over here in the Wikipedia. How about the Ottoman era? What happened during the Ottoman time period? When the Ottomans captured Kurdistan, the social situation of Jews would improve then. The Jewish people generally felt safer under Turkish rule rather than under protection of Kurdish tribes. Jews and Christians, they relied on the protection of Kurdish tribes over there, who would often refer to their Jewish and Christian subjects as min, my Jew, or fileh min, my Christian. That's what's reported here. There were conflicts, I think, especially during the conflicts between Kurdish tribes. The primary targets were the Jewish and Christian subjects of the Kurdish tribe rather than the Kursiaj tribe itself. Now, Ta'anit Azanat Barzani, who we're going to speak about in a few minutes, she happened to be a woman scholar, actually, who lived in Mosul from 1590 to 1670, was the daughter of Rabbi Samuel Barzani of Kurdistan. Very interesting. She would get married to Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi, the Rabbi of Ahmadiyya, who lectured, I give class at Yeshiva. It's interesting. Rabbinit Oznat, I think, was famous for her knowledge of, let's say, Torah, Talmud, Kabbalah, and Jewish law. After the early death of her husband, she would actually become the head of the yeshiva of Ahmadiyya and eventually was recognized as chief instructor of Torah in Kurdistan. Very interesting. She was actually called Ta'anit, a female Talmudic scholar in of itself. We're going to speak about her in due course. And became well known, let's say, for her poetry, command of the Hebrew language. She wrote, I believe, a long poem of a lament and petition in their traditional, let's say, rhymed metrical form. Her poems among the few examples of early modern Hebrew texts written by women. Now, I think Kurdish Jews had lived in Kashan in Iran, and many Jews immigrated to Ottoman Empire during the 1700s and 1800s. They were active in trade in rural villages in what is now Turkey. Regions like Gaziantep and Malatya had substantial Jewish populations. They were usually quite concealed, but did not have any negative interactions with other communities. And that's what we have to point out. I think immigration of Kurdish Jews to the land of Israel initiated during the 16th century. With a community of rabbinic scholars, they would arrive to Tzfat, to Galil, and a Kurdish Jewish quarter had been established there as a result. The thriving period of Tzfat, however, ended in 1660 with the Druze power struggle in the region and an economic decline. Now, more in modern times, let's explore a bit with regards to that. Now, I think since the early 20th century, some Kurdish Jews had been active in Zionistic movements. One of the most famous members of the Lehi was someone named Moshe Barazani. Now, the Barazani family was probably arguably the most famous rabbinic family in Kurdish history. We're going to speak about some of the rabbis from the family, and many public figures will come from this family itself. Their family immigrated from Iraq and Kurdistan and would settle, I believe, in Jerusalem at the end of the 1920s, respectively. Now, it's actually interesting. I think the vast majority of Kurdish Jews were forced out of Iraq, Kurdistan, and evacuated to Israel in the early 1950s. Now, let's explore a bit with regards to Moshe Barazani. He was born, I think, in the year 1926, and he died. He was about to be executed, I think, in 1947. This was at the time of the formation of the state. He was obviously a Kurdish Jew, and he was a member of the Lehi, the Freedom Fighters of Israel, also known as a Stern Gang, underground movement in pre-state mandate Palestine. Now, he is most notable for having died at that point in time, I think, together with a hand grenade, together with Meir Feinstein. There was he was another Jewish underground fighter, and they were under sentence of death. They were about to face, I think, a brutal death at that point in time. So they would, I think, at the end, take their own life, which is well documented. He joined the Lehi at an early age. Now, he would follow in the footsteps of his brother. Initially, he was a member of the Lehi's youth division, and later joined a fighting force. He participated in numerous, let's say, sabotage operations reported over, laying mines to destroy British vehicles and taking part in a railway sabotage. And he was sent on a mission to, at that point in time, the British officer, Brigadier A.P. Davis, reported over to assassinate him. He was stopped and searched by British patrol, which found him near the Schneller camp, a British installation in Jerusalem. A grenade was found in his pocket, and he was arrested. And he was tried before military courts on charges of illegal weapon possessions, and was convicted and sentenced to death at the end. So this was where I would recommend. So he's seen as a very famous Zionistic figure here in modern day, and various commemorations are in his memory. Now, the vast majority of Kurdish Jews were forced out of Iraqi Kurdistan, evacuated Israel in the early 1950s. Together with the Iraqi Jewish community, almost all Kurdish Jews of Iranian Kurdistan relocated mostly to Israel, as well as in the same period. It was reported that the Kurds mourned the loss of their Jewish neighbours and even maintained their synagogues. Now, it's reported over, I think there was an article in the Times of Israel on September 30th, 2013. Today, there are almost 200 Kurdish Jews in Israel, about half of whom live in Jerusalem. There are also over 30 agricultural villages throughout the country that were founded by Kurdish Jews. So phenomenal work they've done in Eretz Israel in of itself. Now, I think come October the 17th, 2015, the Kurdistan regional government named Sherzad Omar Mamsani, a representative, let's say, of the Jewish community at the Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs, who was later with members of Israeli Jewish community. They claimed that there were no Jews remaining in the Kurdistan region, which they think was a reason for the let's say maybe at some point in time there will be a resignation. In 2021, the sending of Hanukkah kits to Jews to Jewish people in Arab regions, including Kurdistan, indicates that there may be remnants of Jewish communities there, but there's no accurate statistics of Jews of Kurdistan currently. Many of the Jews would form settlements all over Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, including Najur, Avital settlement, Azaria, the Bet Yosef one, Givolim, Ein Ha'emek, Ein Yaakov, Even Sapir, Meitav, Milot, Nesarim, Neve Michael, places we've actually visited here on the channel, Patish, Prazmon, Stei Trumot, Shibulim, Talmei Bilu, Revaha, Yardena, and Zachariah. They're very famously enough. Let's explore some more facts within regards to the Jewish community of Kurdistan. It's, as we said before, Kurdistani Jews actually they originate from Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. For centuries, Jewish communities thrived in this region, especially in Iraqi Kurdistan, developing their rich traditions and culture. Now, other facts with regards to Kurdistan, they say that Noah's Ark was actually grounded there. The Kurdish region was where Noah, actually famous enough, and his family first set foot on dry land after the Great Deluge. Actually, the Torah says, I think, that the Ark rested, I believe, on the mountains of Ararat. I think it was rendered by Unclus, the classic Aramaic translator, as Karadu, a clear reference to Kurdistan. That's what we have to point out over here. Just using now a few of these pointers from the Chabad website. Now, no one knows exactly when Jews first arrived in Kurdish region, but there's a popular belief that when the 10 tribes were exiled there, what we do know for sure is that they've been there for centuries. The famous 12th century, obviously, Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela, as we reported before, visited the area and reported more than 100 Jewish communities that indicated many Torah scholars, like we said before, over there. That's interesting. Another fact in regards to the Jews of Kurdistan was one of the most remarkable chapters in Kurdish Jewish history. It's the story of aliyah Ben, an ancient kingdom in the Kurdish region in the 1st century, Common Era. Queen Helena of aliyah Ben and her son, King Monobos, embraced Judaism. They are frequently mentioned in the Gemara, where they are praised for their generousness and piety. We've spoken about that before, I think, in the Daf Yomi series in of itself. Now, the Kurdish language is, interesting enough, I believe, is Aramaic. For many centuries, Aramaic was a dominant Jewish language in the Middle East. While most Jews in the region, I think, eventually transitioned to Arabic, Kurdish Jews continued speaking Aramaic for much longer. They call their language Lishna Yehudiya, meaning their Jewish language. However, as the community relocated to the land of Israel in the past century, Aramaic as a spoken language has become more and more rare, you could say. Now, what's interesting, another factor within regards to them, obviously, not just they produce many great Rabbanim, as we stated before, there'll be many female scholars coming from there, most notably, obviously, Oznat, Rabbanit Oznat Barzani, which is very, very interesting enough. That's what we have to point out over there. Throughout, obviously, history, Kurdish Jewry had produced from the not just the family of Barzani, also Chariri families, also great, let's say, scholars within regards to Jewish law, Kabbalah, poetry, in of itself. Though most of their writings, I think, remain in manuscript form, and that's what we have to point out. Also, Rabbinit Oznat Barzani would lead a yeshiva in Mosul, I think, after her husband had passed away. We're going to speak about some of the great rabbis and rabbinits. They also, interestingly enough, the Kurdistani Jews honored the graves of the great prophets. Now, I think they deeply revered the resting places of several biblical prophets said to be interned to the region. For generations, for example, they made annual pilgrimage to the tomb of the prophet Nahum in Al-Kosh after the festival of Shavuot. This would be, they would often recite prayers there and placed dried fruit on his grave before eating them. Other significant sites, I believe, over there was, just to state out, there was other significant sites. I think, is the prophet of the graves of the prophet of Jonah near ancient Nineveh and the prophet of Obadiah in Mosul, respectively. Kurdish Jews always had that dream to return to Eretz Israel, the ancestral homeland, and throughout 19th and early 20th centuries, thousands made difficult journeys to the land of Israel, building new communities over there. In 1951 to 52, nearly all Kurdish Jewry was airlifted to Israel as part of the Operation Ezra and Nehemiah alongside the rest of Iraqi Jewry. Now it's interesting, there's a specific Kurdish Jewish tradition called the Seharain. What is that? Each year after Pesach, Kurdish Jews would head out to the fields for festive celebration, filled with traditional foods, music and dancing. This beloved festival, known as Seharain, meaning the moon or exertion, was a highlight of the year. Now, when Kurdish Jews settled in Israel, they shifted the celebration to Chol Hamoed Sukkot afterwards, this specific tradition. Today, the festival attracts thousands each year, where participants enjoy Kurdish Jewish cuisine, music and culture. Let's explore now some of the famous rabbinics and rabbis of Kurdish history. There's many great rabbis, but as we mentioned, Rabbinit Aznat Barzani, let's talk a bit about her for a minute. She lived between 1590 to 1670. She was obviously a, let's say, a Talmudic scholar and a poet who lived near Duhok in Kurdistan. She died actually in Mosul, I believe. It was part of the Ottoman Empire in 1670 and was known as, let's say, the first recorded female Talmudic scholar, early historical Kurdish woman, let's just say, in of itself. She was actually born in 1590. She came from the Barzani family, obviously well known in northern Kurdistan, this family was. Her grandfather was a famous rabbi who we'll speak about in a minute, Rav Netanel Halevi, and I think he was a leader of the Jewish community of Mosul and considered to be, let's say, a very holy man in the local Jewish community and its environs. Now, due to the honor of his teachings, he addressed as Adoni over here. His son and Rabbinit Aznat's father was someone named Rabbi Shmuel Barzani, who was a famous mystic, a rabbi, and let's just say was famous there. He established several yeshivot, I think in Barzan, in Accra, in Amedi, in Mosul, to cultivate students who could become Rabbanim, Chazanim, and Shochetz, kosher slaughterers, let's just say. The education of students was supported by donations from Jewish philanthropists. Now, Rabbi Shmuel had no sons, so he taught his daughter, Rabbinit Aznat, the Talmud, the Torah, to prepare her as the successor. According to Rabbinit Aznat herself, she did not learn any other craft or trade or vocation, as she spent all her time learning Torah. She described her upbringing, it's quoted here, "And I never left the entrance to my house or went outside. I was like a princess of Israel. I grew up on the laps of scholars, anchored to my father of blessed memory. I was never taught any work but sacred study." Now, Rabbinit Barzani would get married to Rabbi Yaakov Mizrahi, I think a distant relative, who promised her father that she would do no domestic work and could spend her time as a Torah scholar. Interesting enough, so that's talked over. So I think the title is much more can be related over with regard to. She would receive the title called a Tana'it, and to roll as head of a yeshiva, I think after her husband passed away, is not equivalent to being a rabbi, and hence she's regarded as a rare example of an Orthodox female, let's say, teacher, rabbinic teacher, rather than a rabbi per se, obviously, or rather than or a rabbinic authoritative figure such as a posek or dayan. At the time during when Rabbinit Barzani lived, the concept of rabbinical ordination, smicha, was in flux, I believe, and a unified agreement of the requirements of rituals of smicha across the Jewish world, it did not necessarily exist. So much can be said. Let's say a bit with regards to Rav Netanel Halevi, who was a ancestor. He lived between the 16th and 17th century. He obviously came from the famous Mishpachat Adonim Halevi, and very, very famous family in of itself. And much can be said within regards to him. He was, I think he would learn Torah and Shas at a young age. He would become great in Kabbalah, and he was well known, I think, all throughout the various different regions. He had the Babo Saba, I think the nickname over there, and really great Torah in itself. He was nicknamed Adoni, just showed he was like a master within regards to Torah in itself. And yeah, he was a famous rabbi, one of the famous rabbis of Kurdistan. Let's explore some more of the rabbis from the famous Barzani Kurdistani family of the last few hundred years. A more recent rabbi, who lived between 1892 to 1980, was a rabbi named Rabbi Yitzchak Barzani. Another one, he would become a head of Jewish court, was a rabbi of Arbil in Kurdistan, and the rabbi of later on, when he come to Eretz Israel, of Ein Emek, a moshav over there in Kurdistan, respectively. He was born in 1892 in Kurdistan in Sfia, and he would pass away at the age of 88 in 1980 in Israel. And he was actually a Talmid of Rabbi Salimon Barzani, respectively. He would have many great Talmudim himself, including Rabbi Shabtai ben Chaim, who we'll speak about in a minute, Rabbi Nuri ben Nachum, Rabbi Moshe ben Mordechai, and Rabbi Eliyahu ben Zachariah, also very interesting enough. Now, I think he was born, he actually himself came from great rabbinical auspices. His father was Rabbi Yaakov Barzani, and he was born in a village, I think in Sfia in Kurdistan, and he was the 22nd generation reported over of generations of Rabbanim. So you can see one of the most famous rabbinic families in Jewish history. And many of them of the Barzani family were shochetz, were great Rabbanim all throughout the Jewish cycles himself. He would actually receive an ordination to become a shochet and a bodek in 1910 at a very young age. And I think through his uncle and his father. In 1924, he was actually ordained by rabbis, I think even in Baghdad, interesting enough. So he was well known in all different places. He would become the chief rabbi of Arbil and head of Jewish court over there. And I think he was close to Rabbi Yitzhak Noach was another famous rabbi over there at that point in time. And he was involved with various different Zionistic organizations, let's just say. Also, especially in 1935, we'll do workings. I think he had a connection with Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who was obviously Ashkenazic chief rabbi. I think in 1951 he'll make aliyah to Israel, and he would settle in the Ein Emek Moshav over there. And he'll work as a rabbi of the Moshav and take on important positions over there. And he passed away in 1980, I think in 18th of Cheshvan, if I'm not mistaken. He was, I think, buried close to the Moshav, if I'm not mistaken. And much more can be said within regard to him. He would write various different chroniclers would actually write important things with regards to him. I believe his son Yoel would become Bachir B'Mossad, if I'm not mistaken. That's one thing. I think his brother was Rabbi Avram Barzani, and I believe, I have to double check. I think his grandson, if I'm not mistaken, is Shlomo Arbil Bali. Interesting enough, also. So among his Talmudim, he had various great Talmudim, as we mentioned before, including Rabbi Nuri ben Nachum, who would become a great rabbi. Rabbi Shabtai ben Chaim, we're going to speak about in a minute, will become the rabbi of the Moshav, Menucha U'Matzot Azor Lachish, and Rabbi Moshe ben Mordechai become the rabbi of Tirat Carmel, for example, and there was other great rabbis. Another great rabbi let's speak about, Rabbi Avram Barzani, lived between 1899 and 1973, another great Kurdistani rabbi. Oh yes, he was actually a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Fataya, and one of his sons would be Rabbi Moshe Barzani Yechezkel, I believe. Now, he himself, Rabbi Avram, was born in Arbil in Kurdistan. He came from great Rabbinic auspices, another great Kurdistani rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Barzani, born right at the end of the 19th century. Obviously, once again, he was the 22nd generation of the famous family in of itself. And he was very much part of the congregation of Arbil. He was ordained also, I think, at the age of 17 to become a shochet and a bodek, and receive rabbinic ordination. He would go to Baghdad quite sure afterwards over there. So he would over there, and that's where he will become a student of the famous Rabbi Yehuda Fataya over there. And very much, I think he would actually make aliyah in 1934 to Eretz Israel and would live in Beit Yisrael neighborhood in Jerusalem, place we visited on this channel before. And he was known as a famous rabbi over there. I think also famous for writing Komiyut, amulet, just like Rabbi Yehuda Fatai, his rabbi was. And he would learn under great rabbis, I think, with great rabbis, including Rabbi Ben Zion Abba Shaul, Rav Solomon Motzafi, really great rabbis over there, if I'm not mistaken. And there was over there, that's much more can be pointed out. I think he had a connection with other great Ashkenazi rabbis also. Now, another famous rabbi is more recently, because the Rabbi Tzimach Barzani, also Kurdistani, lived between 1910 to 1997. He was rabbi of Accra and Mosul in Iraq, and later on will become the rabbi of the Yeshuv Mevatzeret Zion. And we've actually visited once again Mevatzeret Zion here on this channel also. Ki Rav Tzimach was born in 1910 around there in Accra, in Kurdistan, respectively, and came from great auspices, Yosef and Esther. Obviously, he was the grandson of another great rabbi, Rabbi Sasson Barzani, who was one of the great rabbis of the Jewish community, Iraqi Jewish community over there. And he would learn in Beit Midrash of his grandfather, of Rav Sasson, if I'm not mistaken. Very interesting. His grandfather was also a rabbi and a shochet, so he would become also just like that. And I think he would get married to Rabbinit Farcha. She was, I think, the daughter of Chamolot Gabay Yehudi Akra. And they would, I think, dwell near his grandfather, respectively. And obviously will take on various different positions. He was a rabbi also of Rabbi Shabtai ben Chaim, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was around 1946, at that point in time. Obviously they had integral role in Mosul over there. 1951 they would actually, I think, go to Eretz Israel. Many of the communities from Mosul would actually go to Eretz Israel over there and would eventually end up in Mevatzeret Zion, if I'm not mistaken, over there, and have a prestigious position. His son, among his sons, included Malchiel Barzani, who was a Rosh Ma'atzot HaMakomot Mevatzeret Zion, another prestigious governmental position. He himself passed over Rav Tzemach Barzani in 1997, I think on the 6th of Nisan of that year, respectively. Another famous, more recent Kurdistani rabbi is Rabbi Shabtai ben Chaim, who we mentioned about just a few minutes ago. He was born in 1920 and he passed away on 10th of May 2011. He was known as a great rabbi there, a Dayan, or Iraqi rabbi also. He would become the rabbi of Moshav Menucha, B'motzot Hazorot Lachish. Very interesting enough. So his Hilul is actually on the 6th of Iyar. And it's interesting, he was a Talmud of Rabbi Avraham Menachem, Rabbi Salman Barzani, Rabbi Yitzchak Barzani, great rabbis of their time. He was actually born in, I think, an area called Zebar in Kurdistan. It came from great auspices. His father was Chaim, if I'm not mistaken. And very, very great families in of itself. I think in 1934, he was learning under great Chachamim of Kurdistan, including Rabbi Avraham Menachem, Rabbi Tzemach Barzani, who we just mentioned now, and was seen as an Ilui and expert within regards to Torah learning in of itself. And he would learn in famous yeshivot over there. In 1938, he would learn to become a shochet and bodek over there. And I think he was also, if I'm not mistaken, mohel and a dayan, so various different Jewish important positions he was over there. He would learn under Rabbi Salman Barzani also. And he was part of the committee of the Rabbanim, if I'm not mistaken. And he would be appointed, I think, as a dayan in Bet Din in the year 1938 and will continue. He's brilliant. So now another famous rabbi we just mentioned about before, Rab Avraham Menachem. He lived between 1890 to 1980. Another great rabbi spoken about before, from Kurdistan, from Accra. He happened to have been. He was actually born in Shikhacha in Kurdistan, and he passed away at the age of 90. His Hilul is on the Tet Tishrei. Actually, it's going to be tomorrow, I believe. And he passed away in Jerusalem. He was a famous rabbi. He was a student of Rabbi Reuven Barzani, Rabbi Betzalel ben Shimon, and Rabbi Menachem HaKohen. Over there, let's speak about Rabbi Menachem for a minute. He was born in the village of Shikha in Kurdistan, and was very, very great. There was Talmud Torah there. There was a big Knesset, and I think his father was an educator over there also, which we also have to point out. I think when he was 11 years of age, he would move to Mosul in order to continue learning under Rabbi Reuven Barzani. And after 4 years learning in Mosul, he would return to his village over there and will be learning under auspices of Rabbi Betzalel ben Chacham Shimon, another great rabbi over there. And when he was 19, he would progress even more. He became rabbi, shochet, bodek, and mohel. And he would receive rabbinic ordination, let's just say, in of itself, and would really, really excel within regards to Torah in of itself. 1951, once again, he would be part of the many people that will make aliyah to Eretz Israel, to Jerusalem, and he will become a rabbi and educator of Torah in Israel once he gets there. And he passed away at the age of 90 on 19th September 1980. Once again, he left great generations in of itself. For example, his grandson is a famous singer, Aaron Menachem, who is the son, obviously, of Chacham Yitzchak. Also, Rab David Menachem, another one, a relative of his. Rab the Moshav Yardena and the Bet Yosef, respectively, two Kurdistani Moshav settlements in Jerusalem. Another one of his descendants, David Menachem, another famous person, Harav David Menachem, I think he'll become a rabbi also, and music, connected to music also. He would have famous Talmidim, Rabbi Menachem would, including the famous Rabbi Zachari Barashi, who we're going to speak about in a few minutes. He would live until 116, 117 years of age, one of the oldest living Israeli Jews of all time, without doubt. He was a famous, Rabbi Barashi was a darshan, he was a famous rabbi, and the author of the Yalkut Barashi. And another one of his students, who we mentioned before, Rabbi Shabtai ben Chaim, who obviously become the rabbi of the Moshav Menucha Motzot Ozrei Lachish. His son, Rabbi Yitzchak Menachem, will become also rabbi of the Moshav Revach, if I'm not mistaken, also. And Rabbi Shimon Romach, another great rabbi, Rabbi David Menachem. So really great rabbis that we have to point out. Okay, another famous rabbi, more recent rabbi also, Rabbi Yitzchak Amadi. He lived between 1926 to 2017, was an educator, founder. He was a rabbi of the Moshav Ein Hamek, and would actually receive a prize in the year 2000 as Yakir Yerushalayim. We have to point out also he was born once again in Ahmadiyya, I think the Iraq, place of itself, one of the great sages of Kurdistan, we have to point out. He was came from great Rabbinical auspices. His father was Rav Shabtai, his mother was Rabbinit Rachel. He was born in Ahmadiyya. I think his parents would immigrate to Israel when he was only 8 years of age over there. And he would actually famously learn in Talmud Torah in the old city of Israel. He was educated over there. He would live in Zichron Yosef. It was a Kurdish neighborhood in Jerusalem over there, I think near Nachlaot, Machane Yehuda. He would learn in Yeshivat Porat Yosef, Yeshivat Merkaz Arav, and various other places also. Now, another famous rabbi we mentioned just about before was Rabbi Zachari Barashi. Once again, I think he passed away in 2017. He was born in 1900, right at the start of the 20th century. He was also awarded with the Yaki Yerushalayim Award in 1980, I believe. A very famous rabbi. He was buried, I think, in Har Menuchot, and he was living in Baka neighborhood in Jerusalem. And much can be said about him. He was also, once again, I think he was born in Kurdistan. His father was Rab Eliyahu, his mother Rabbinit Simcha, I believe. He was living in the village of Barashi over there naturally, and there's no official document, but it's claimed he was born in the year 1900. So that's very interesting. And I think he would learn different crafts, especially weaving, carpets, so on and so forth, and that the family would make a living within regards to that. In Kurdistan, he would study Talmud Torah and would give over various different grand juris sermons. In 1934, he obtained permission to immigrate to Eretz Israel, and I think in 1936 will eventually make aliyah. He began working in construction over there, gave over Torah sermons constantly in various synagogues. He was founder of National Organization of Kurdistani Jews in Israel, and was one of the publishers, I think, of the journal, of a specific journal of Kurdistani Jews that was published in several volumes over there. He worked in education. I think he was connected to Jerusalem municipality. He was a member of labor councils over there. And very interesting. He was really a great rabbi at that point in time, and we actually recorded about him. He would receive various different accolades also while he was in Israel, all throughout that we've mentioned that also. Now, another famous rabbi, going back to Barzani territory over here, Rabbi Yosef Barzani, between 1869 to 1964, he was a famous man of the congregation of the Jewish community, Sephardi Jewish community in Jerusalem. So he was Kurdistani, like he was original Jerusalem Jew over there. He was a treasurer, I think, of Iriyat Jerusalem over there. He had connections to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, a time period also of the mandate, or the British mandate over there. He was, I think, living one of the founders of Ohel Shlomo neighborhood. I'm not sure if he was a rabbi per se, Yosef Barzani, but he was a very great person. And I think he was part of the Sephardi committee also in Jerusalem, which we've spoken about on various occasions before. He was 5th generation, interesting enough, in Eretz Israel. And I think he was a son of Avram Barzani and Raina Mizrahi, and various greatness of them. I think originally there was Chacham David Berazan, would actually originally make aliyah to Eretz Yisrael in 1741 and was a famous Shluchei Rabbanan from Tzfat. He would travel to Iraq and various other places representing Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's interesting, Rabbi Yosef Barzani would learn in a famous Doresh Tzion school, and he would also learn in the Beit Sefer Alliance, also, I believe, which was in Jerusalem, which is spoken about also on this series before. 1896, he would work for the municipality of Jerusalem, which was under the Sultan at that point in time of the Ottoman Empire. In 1900, he would be appointed as a treasurer for the area and will take on this role, I think, for 40 years, interestingly enough. So he was very, very famous, let's just say, and take on various important positions over there. He passed away in March 1964, was buried in Har HaZeitim, the Mount of Olives burial place also, spoken about there. And I think this famous historian Yaakov Yoshua, who would write down various different memories with regards to him also, his greatness. Now, another famous rabbi, Rabbi Aloan Shimon Abidani. Very interesting enough. He lived between 1881 to 1981. He was 100 years of age when he passed away. Another great Kurdistani rabbi. He was a Chazan, he was a Darshan, one of the, I think, a chief rabbi of El Amdiya in Kurdistan in Iraq. He was one of the great rabbis of the Jewish community of Kurdistan in Jerusalem towards the end of his life. He was a translator, also, especially Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketim books, to Aramaic Kurdit. He was the author of various Halacha books, Torah law books, Sefer of Zohar, and he would get he'll be awarded the Yakir Ha'i Yerushalayim also. Obviously, he was born in El Amdaya in 1881, passed away in Jerusalem, and it was actually nicknamed the Chacham Al-Va'an. Let's explore a bit with regards to him. He was obviously a great rabbi in Kurdistan. He was born, he was part of the Ottoman Empire. His father, I believe, was Rav Shimon, if I'm not mistaken, head of Jewish court inside the place, respectively. And I think it was a famous family also in of itself that we have to point out. I think it was during the First World War. He would have to draft, I think, to the Ottoman Empire army, and I think he actually did that, if I'm not mistaken. And he would work as a shochet, he would work in kashrut, and during that specific time period, I think he would arrive in Mosul at one stage in time and will be taking on importances over there. Let's just say in of itself. He was a mohel also, I believe. He would work in various villages in Kurdistan, in the mohel, and performing Brit Milahs also, and was very, very famous over there at that stage in time. More can be said with regards to that. I think in 1917 he would return to El Mamdaya over there and be the rabbi of the Kehila over there, of the Jewish community. He would take on various different important positions, head of Jewish court, I believe, and I think he was close to other rabbis. He was in connection with Rabbi Sassoon Kadori, for example, who was the chief rabbi of Iraq, and he was very much in connection with the Bet Din al-Gadol, the great large Jewish court of Baghdad also. And in 1918, I think he would actually continue, he would get married, I believe, to, her name was Rabbinic Zalfa Mizrahi. And I think they would have Shosha Yeladim, 3 children. And then they would I think he would later on get married to Rabbinic Rivka, if I'm not mistaken, and they would have 12 children. Now, when he was 39 years of age, I think there was the king of Iraq at that point in time. I think his name was King Faisal first. And Rabbi Abdini, I think, there was an appointment of a position to the Melech, to the king over there. So that was prestigious. He was in connection with the kings and directly over there. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he would arrive eventually to... He was very much connected to all the Jewish communities of Al Amda, and eventually he would make aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, over there to Israel, and I think along with 50 families at that stage in time, and they would go. I think he was in connection with other people and various important people in the state, and would take on various different important positions. Let's just say in of itself, which we've actually pointed out, and it will eventually land in Eretz Yisrael. So I would recommend everyone to, if you want to hear more with regards to Rav Abdini, we actually recorded a historic video about him at the time period of his Hilula. And he was eventually came to Eretz Yisrael, became a huge rabbi over there, and would be awarded the Yakir Yerushalayim title. He passed away on the 29th of Tammuz in Hetafshin Mem Aleph, as so forth. I think his brother is Rav Batzalel Abdini, became a great rabbi, chief rabbi of Diyarbakir. His other brother, Rabbi Benjamin Avdini, would become the chief rabbi of Chevel, Zivar. And another one, his brother, Rabbi Yisrael Avdani, was a spiritual leader of the Shush, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a rabbinic family in of itself. He was author of Rabbi Avdini, of great Torah books, including Maaseh HaGdolim, the Sefer Sgulat V'Rufuot, Sefer Gorolot, Haggadah Pesach, which was a translation in Kurdistani, Targum Tanakh in Kurdistani, Tafisirim B'Shirim for the Kurdish Jewish community, Sefer Midrash, which was manuscript, Sefer Dinei Shchita, once again manuscript, and the Korban and the Elban, which was in 5 different parts, I believe. Also, this was on the Zohar in Kitab Yad. Let's explore some different parts of Kurdistan which had different Jewish communities over there. For example, Erbil, a city in Iraqi Kurdistan. There's a great Jewish community. I think as of 1947, it numbered 5,500 Jewish community over there. They would mostly speak Arabic, a few Aramaic. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, some families would immigrate to Eretz Israel, but they would obviously mainly immigrate between 1950 to 1951. Another place, Awana, was a very small town located 30 kilometers north of Erbil. All the Jews, I think, emigrated to Israel between 1950 to 1951. Then there was a house of Tanura. This was a village in Iraqi Kurdistan with a great Jewish community. The Beit Tanura was a small Jewish community, and I think in 1937 there was only about 20 families there and were found in that place, and they moved to Duhok. 1951, once again, they would emigrate to Israel, to Nes Harim, and settle in Moshav, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, now Barzan or Barzani obviously is a famous Iraqi Jewish village over there, known for Barzan, for saying So the Barzani family in of itself, obviously the originators, including the famous Rabbinic or Znat Barzani, great figures. By the end of the First World War, there would be 400 Jews living there. Obviously beforehand, I'd assume it would be a much higher figure. And many Jews would flee to Accra at later stage. In 1947, only about 20 Jews lived in Barzan, and obviously they would immigrate in 1950 to 1951. Another famous place was Faded. Over there, that was there was relatively a good relationship with the general population. Obviously, after the establishment of the state, the 170 families would eventually, once again, make aliyah to Eretz Israel. Zakho, this was a governorate of Iraq, Dohak, in the city of Zakho. I think Jews will obviously once again immigrate to Jerusalem, and during the First World War there was about 2,400 Jews over there. Obviously they will all emigrate to Eretz Israel during the operation of Ezra and Nehemiah, reported over. Kirkuk, another city in Iraqi Kurdistan, 300 Jews lived there, and they all emigrated to Israel in 1951. In Anna, or Sadishat, these were rural settlements in Kurdistan at the eastern border. Nirvana, this was in part of Iraqi Kurdistan. During World War II, parts of the city and the synagogues were burned down. The Jews left the city and moved to Ahmadiyya, except for 3 families reported over. Another city is Suleimania. I think it's a border of Iran. The Jews of Suleimania number 300 families, which would emigrate to Israel in 1951. A few women, so that's interesting. Ahmadiyya, this was another famous place which had many different great rabbis. We mentioned before that the famous traveler Benjamin of Tudela lived between 1167 to 1170, wrote about the life of the Jewish community there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, by 1950 to 1951, around 400 Jews would actually go to Eretz Israel. Now let's explore the Turkish Kurdish communities for a minute. Urfa, for example, is one of them. Most of them would emigrate. I think a lot of them would go into Eretz Israel in the late 19th century, in 1896, and they did not speak Kurdish or Aramaic, but Arabic and Turkish, if I'm not mistaken, so they're different. And they would, I think when they arrived in Jerusalem, they established separate synagogues and continued to distinguish themselves from the Kurdish community in Jerusalem. Now, and there was another place, Barashi, I think a village near Duhak, we mentioned about this before. At the end of I believe the Second World War, there was about 50 families that would eventually or the First World War, actually, I'm not too sure, that they would move to Eretz Israel. Maybe it was actually in the year 1929 they would move, way before 1951. Now, Iranian Kurdish Jewish communities, there's a lot over there also, include Sachis. I think most of them would obviously once again immigrate in 1951, and I think many of them would immigrate to Eretz Israel, move to Moshav Nesarim, and they would use Aramaic language, I believe, and yeah, the community known to speak fluent Hebrew quite quickly. The Miandov neighborhood is another Iranian Kurdistan neighborhood where, let's just say, there was immigration, and the immigration to Eretz Israel was led by Rabbi Shmuel Baruchim, I believe, and language is Azeri Turkish, I think, which is unlike other Jewish communities of Kurdistan who speak various dialects of Aramaic. Another area was Bukhan, and there was a huge, let's just say, wave of aliyah in 1950, once again led by Rabbi Shmuel Baruchim, and then Salmas, northern Iranian Kurdistan, and Sandash, a city in Iranian Kurdistan, respectively. That's another famous place over there which you have to point out. Kerman Shah is another city of Iranian Kurdistan, and Sabla, which is a city of Iranian Kurdistan. The Syrian Kurdish communities also, including Kamishli, for example, which the Jews over there created for themselves a lifestyle distinct from the rest of the population, we have to point out. They maintained traditional Jewish framework over there, built houses, were connected to each other. They created like a proper Jewish community. And after the 1930s, businesses flourished. The Jews were treated well, but obviously after World War II, the number would reach as many as 3,000. And I think they would eventually, the Jews community, the situation would really worsen once the state of Israel was established in 1948. They were persecuted, robbed, and problems were with the authorities at the end, and that would peter out later on. So very interesting. We explored a bit of the history with regards to the Kurdistani Jewish community over here. I hope this was informative. Over here on this special edition, we're trying to explore all the various different countries, different traditions that went on. We didn't really speak much about the synagogues over there. There's so much that I leave you all to research on that yourself. But wishing you a great day. Thanks for spending the time to watch. And subscribe to the channel. We're nearing a staggering 7,500 subscribers here on this channel. So wishing you a great day. Thanks for watching and take care. Be well, everyone.